I chased everything under the sun. I relate to that King Solomon story so well because we look for, whether it's chocolate to give you that, that little dopamine effect, whether it's an IG, whether it's video games, whether it's sex, whether it's music, we're always looking for that thing that's going to fill up our soul and fill up our tank. Everything else is fleeting. And when you're chasing several rabbits, you catch none. If you can surrender to God, there's a beautiful thing in that where all of a sudden, all of the things that stress you out with the future, and you just say, you know what? I mean, there is eternity. And here I am living for the moment instead of living for eternity. So even if I'm not a believer, if you just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to give this surrendering thing a chance. Like, I've tried every other way and every other way hasn't worked. What have I got to lose? Let me surrender to Jesus and see what he does with my life. That's a superhuman life.
David, my brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
What's up, Frank? It's good to be here. I'm looking forward to an awesome conversation with you.
So great to have you here, man. And so you've written a couple books. You're an author of a book that was recently published, but back in 2020, you and Angelique co-authored a book called Turn On. And I want to start actually in the middle of that book because there's a powerful quote that I came across. And you guys said, the science of touch transcends species. The science of touch convincingly suggests that we need to connect with other people on a basic physical level. We are indeed hardwired for connection and touch by nature. I love that quote. I think it speaks so much to the men that I work and serve with. So I'm curious, David, what inspired you to write this book? And how did you know that it was going to be so necessary at the time of its publication?
Well, it's kind of weird how God gives you a prompting for things. And what happened was Angelique and I were so busy with our business. We had 2 little girls, and we often need to teach on the thing that we struggle with the most. Obviously, you know that, right? We feel like if this is something we're struggling with and other people are, and we noticed that we were disconnected from our families. Angelique and I were so busy trying to get ahead that we missed out on the emotional, intimate connection of our relationship. And I said, this is what's happening is we're being deceived. We are being led astray. We are being put on what I like to call cruise control. And that's what happens in our marriages. That's what happens sometimes in our parenting relationship and even in our bodies is we get so comfortable with technology and then we forget that there's a human component there. And so what I saw was this is taking us further and further away from the real connection, the touch that we need. And now technology has given us the opportunity for me to like FaceTime my parents every day with the kids on the way to school, which is great because they live in Florida and we don't live there. And so it's got some, aspects to it that enhance our lives. But if we don't sit there and say, wait a minute, we need to be in control, then what happens is it takes over very slowly and methodically. And before we know it, we've lost all connection.
Yeah, I love that so much. And obviously it just rings so true to a lot of the work that I'm doing in the men that I'm serving. And I think I don't know if you've seen the movie, The Social Dilemma, the documentary that was on Netflix.
I haven't seen it, but it's been recommended to me a lot. So I probably got to watch it.
Yeah, it's probably something you probably need to check out because there's a quote in that book. And I think it's from one of the original, like one of the first 5 guys inside of Facebook. And the quote, I remember when I saw it, I took a screenshot from my phone on the television. And there's only 2 industries or 3, I think 3 industries in the world that call their customers users, not consumers. And it's drugs, pharmaceutical industry, and then technology. And just when you really spend some time thinking about that. So I'm curious how has your relationships with obviously your family, your kids, but then other people changed since going down the path of researching and writing this book?
Oh, Frank, I would love to tell you that I'd learned from my own advice, but I'll tell you what, it's never ending. It's like when we talk about strongholds, you and I have talked about strongholds, which could be in the form of any addiction. And so when we look at this book and we talk about the dopamine addiction that comes with the phone, the bells, the whistles, the lights. And I interviewed a professor from Georgetown University who had studied this for years. And he's saying, even when that phone is on your table, it takes away. And your children know that at any moment, your time with them can be interrupted. And what happens is it's a distraction. You see the light go off from your peripheral vision. You see a notification or you hear the ding. And that interrupts the mental conversations that you're having with someone who's literally in front of you. And I feel terrible because in full honesty and transparency, I can't tell you how many times 2 years after the book came out that my wife Angelique will look at me and say, David, you've written this book on being turned on and you're starting to get turned off again. And so when we look at a stronghold, our pastor once said it this way: a stronghold is like a door, and a door that's never really locked, and it can always be opened. The question is, who's trying to open that door? It's the enemy. So whether it's with pornography and you say, hey, you know what? I haven't watched pornography in years. All it takes is one little exposure to it, and all of a sudden the thought comes back in there. And if you're not strong-willed person and you're not with, you're not with the Holy Spirit, then all of a sudden that door just has a crack in it and it becomes open again. So you're never going to come to a place where like, I've mastered my domain and I am no longer a slave to this technology of the cell phone, or what you would call this video slash technological era. It's always going to say, come back to me. Just like liquor, just like drugs, and just like pornography, it's always there going, come back, because that's where the devil wants to get you, in a weak spot. So I have to constantly be on charge. My wife will say things, and at times I'll get like a little offended, like I'm just making a post or I'm just answering somebody. And she's like, are you really doing that? Why are you getting so defensive?
Wow. What you're speaking to there, I mean, is so true. None of us are immune to this. I mean, here I am, 3.5 years in leading the forefront of the conversation around porn addiction, the ties between our phones. I put a lot of guardrails up in my life. Like, one rule I have in place, and it's been almost 4 years now since my phone has entered into my bedroom. Like, it's just a no phone zone for me. It's something I try to bring to the men that we work with as well. But recently, we started getting onto TikTok. Like, it was a platform where like I need to be there. Like, if I'm going to reach all the men
Yeah.
that need me, I need to be on that platform. But I caught myself early on, Dave, like I was falling into the trap because, again, these apps, these devices, these phones are wired to get us addicted to them. So even myself is admitting here, like I have fallen into the trap. I'll find myself 30 minutes there. Like, what did I just do with all of my time? So I'm curious, with writing the book, with what you're sharing here, what rules have you maybe kind of interjected or placed in your life in terms of boundaries? Because I have a lot that have
Yeah.
been very helpful for me. I'm curious what you guys
Okay.
have found
Sure.
some
That's
value
a
in.
great question. I love it. And the first thing, it's funny because I'm not on TikTok. And I remember the
It's
same
a
thing.
good
People said,
idea.
hey, you need to get on TikTok. That's where everybody's at now. So I went and I got on for a day. Frank, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm like, how? I'm just getting on. They don't know nothing about me. There was so much softcore porn on TikTok. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, and I immediately didn't. I was on for maybe a couple hours, and I looked at my wife. I said, no, this is not for me. It's not a good place. So I got off TikTok, and I can't believe the amount of softcore porn. And when we say softcore, what that means to me is girls in bikinis, butt shots. That means,
Yeah, I think you're being polite there.
yeah,
I think it's maybe not the hardcore stuff, but we remove the soft, man. I think some of the things that I've seen out there would, in my opinion, classify as porn.
yeah. So let's go back to the original question. That what have we done? What boundaries have we set? Well, I got to give my wife credit. She's been fantastic. I am what you call a squirrel. I need constant stimulation. Sometimes I'm even on conference calls and I got to be doing other things because that's the way I function. But that could be an excuse. What we have to do is we have to be able to learn self control. We have to invite the Holy Spirit and say, calm me down. Even at night, sometimes I can't sleep because my mind's working. And what I've done is I said, Jesus, calm me down. Frank, you know what I used to do? When I couldn't sleep at night, I used to think about sex. What I used to do is I used to think about football and silly things to kind of get my mind off the minutia and all the things that were coming in my head. But I can't do that now. So what I've done is I said, Jesus, calm me down, put me to sleep. Guess what? He's done it. Okay. Going back to my wife, though, when we first got married, I was a single guy. And the first thing when we bought our new house, I said, hey, babe, where do you want to put the TV in our bedroom? And she looked at me and she says, no, there will be no TV in our bedroom. To this day, 12 years later, we've been married 12 years. We've never once had a TV in our bedroom because she said the bedroom, and I put this in my book, the bedroom's for two things: making love, and it's for talking and having conversations. That's where some of the most important work is done, both intimately in the lovemaking and intimately in the figuring out how we're going to get through certain points in our lives, whether it be the business or the children. And what you don't need is you don't need that TV. The other thing is my wife and I have always gone to bed at the same time, which might seem kind of like a little bit of a weird thing, but I'm not saying, hey babe, you go to bed and I'll stay up for 2 hours watching TV or doing something else or getting into other things. So we try to do those things together. Now, when it comes to the actual phone, we had a thing 2 years ago when the book came out, and there's a Ronald Reagan quote that says, "All great change in America begins at the dinner table." And I started to think about that quote, and I said, you know what? I remember every day when I was a kid, I sat to the right of my father. I'm from a family of four, and my mom had dinner on the table at 6 o'clock pretty much every night. You had to be home. There was no excuse great enough where you could say, Dad, I'm not going to make dinner tonight. I'm out playing ball or I'm out at a friend's house. If you weren't home at the dinner table, that was a big no-no. And so all great change starts at the dinner table. That's where psychologists and people who have studied this is where young people get a chance to expose their emotions and express themselves within the family. It's a huge part of growing up. And Frank, what have we seen over the last couple of decades is that is going away. Certainly divorce has a lot to do with it, but technology is one of the big things. And what we noticed in our family was the kids were, watching a cartoon, and mom would say, okay, you guys can, you can eat yours by the TV. Dad's got the laptop out doing some work, and mom's doing some work on her laptop or her phone. And you turn around one day and you look at it and you say, this is not dinner. This is not communion. In the Bible, when they had the Last Supper, when we talk about being the communion, right? That's what it means, is to sit down and talk. So we had a thing called the turned on table. And all we wanted to do, we said, look, families, I know it's hard in this day and age. We get food delivered. People got different schedules. Mom and dad are working. Mom can't, make the food like she did when my mom was, when I was growing up. But we said maybe 1 or 2 nights a week. If we could just start a trend, and we don't want nothing from you in return. This is not a moneymaker thing. We just said, let's do the turned on table. And we did this little video where we showed all our kids putting the devices in the basket. We turned off the TVs, and we just sat there at dinner and we talked. It's going to take almost a superhuman effort, because once technology is introduced into society, it's very hard to go backwards. It's very hard to say, let's go back to 1975. You're not going to do that. But if you let it consume you, then dinner's gone. The family where they commute, where they have meaningful conversations, where kids start to talk to their parents at the dinner table and dad and mom find out what went on in their day, it's gone. And so you see this, it's like a tsunami that just breaks up families and marriages and friendships even. Because we go out to a dinner table and you'll look at the table next to you and everybody's on their phone. Whether it's, 4 young kids, it's just I can go so much into it because I'm so passionate about it.
I love it so much, man. And what's, what word is popping in my head is the intentionality at which you and, Angelique has set up your relationship, the intentionality at which you set up your home, the intentionality at which you've set up how you're raising your children. For me, I recently moved into a home here. Like I was living in a small, tiny 1-bedroom apartment for the last 2 years. I've been focused on really building, rebuilt, recovery. I literally, I had no dining room. Like my office was the bedroom in the 1-bedroom apartment, and I slept in what was the dining room. So all my meals were either on the couch, or a lot of them were at my desk while I was working. Since living here, I moved in July 1. I haven't eaten a meal at my desk. I haven't eaten a meal on my couch. I've eaten every single meal, whether it's by myself or somebody is coming over to have dinner with me. I sit at the dining room table and I eat, because that's what that table is for. It's the dining room table. So when I'm dining, whether it's eating a meal for lunch, whether it's having breakfast, or I'm sitting down and I prepared a dinner for myself, I eat it at the table. So I just love what you're speaking to here. And like you said, it's the effort. It's putting in the intention behind what we're doing, not just thinking that we're going to live this purpose-driven life without having some focus, effort, and intention behind it.
Yeah. And I'll tell you the truth, and I think this is really going to be a big aha moment for maybe you and your audience, is because this started before I got married. Now, my wife has been a huge catalyst in helping me along the way, but let's go back before I was married. I was 36 years old. I was a serial dater. I was what you would call, I did a lot of things that I wasn't proud of, right? Let's just put it that way. And it came to the point where I was frustrated, and I said, David, I didn't want to be that old dude in the bar trying to pick up young women, looking at my life 10 years down the road. And I said, you've been dating all the wrong girls for the wrong reasons. And I had this feeling, intuition, that God was telling me something. Now, on our podcast, we talk about the voice of God and how he talks to us. There's several different ways. Some people have literally heard the booming voice of God, but most of the time what it is, it's called intuition or an inner voice, a prompting, where God, you feel, is speaking to you strongly. And it happened once when I was living in Miami, and I was uh, going out to clubs, and I was waking up uh, in the middle of the afternoon, and I was had this epiphany coming home from a club in South Beach by myself at 10 o'clock in the morning. So nothing good happens at 10 o'clock in the morning when you're in club clothes and you're by yourself. And I had this prompting from God that says, David, you're chasing something right now that you're never going to catch. It's the proverbial carrot in front of you that you're always looking for, whether it's euphoria in music or a good time, and you're chasing it. So get out of the situation. So I literally moved from South Beach to Tampa, where my family was. I had to get out of that environment. Your environment means so much to you, and my environment was not good. So that was the one stage. But I went from this music slash partying addiction with ecstasy to this addiction to serial dating, and really just girls were like a sport for a little while. Um, and then you come to this other epiphany that, hey, this is not it either. It's like King Solomon. Like, you're chasing all these rabbits, you're going to catch none, and after a while you realize there's nothing new under the sun. And so here's the big thing. I literally had this prompting again from God, and he said surrender. you know and what that surrender meant was I stopped going out to the clubs. And I what prompted this, Frank, is when you said you were eating dinner and you're in your apartment by yourself. And it was the first time in my life where my friends called, and I said, I'm good by myself. Because what happens, Frank, is sometimes we get frustrated and confused with the dating scene, or we break up with a girl and you say, I'm done. But then your friends call you like, hey man, there's this awesome party. We're at this club. There's all kinds of babes here. You got to come here. And you're like, all right, you pulled my arm. But this was the first time in my life where I said, I'm good. I don't care how many girls are there. I don't care how much fun you're having. Like, I need to spend time on my own, on myself, and I need to get to know myself. And I remember for months I would make myself dinner alone. I would go down. I had a hot tub in my apartment there. I lived right there where you are in Tampa, and I had this really cool hot tub downstairs. And I would go down there and sit in the hot tub at night and relax on a Friday and Saturday night and have a lot of alone time. And it was then, once I surrendered to God and I stopped chasing what I thought I wanted, and I listened to what my spirit wanted, it's then that He brought the woman into my life that I was ready for, because I was not ready at that time. If I would have met Angelique 2 or 3 months earlier, guaranteed I would have ruined it. And I wouldn't have had my 12-year marriage. I wouldn't have had my 3 children. I wouldn't have had my company. I wouldn't have had my podcast. I wouldn't have had my 2 books. All of that was a catalyst, or was a result of the catalyst of me saying, God, I surrender to you, and I'm going to spend some time with myself alone as a man. And what I call it is getting my house in order.
I love that so much, man. And it's that's been the last 2.5 years of my life. I think the ability for a man to spend time alone in his thoughts, to just be present by himself, is a superpower that we all need to possess. I've just spent 2 of the last 3 weeks on the road. I was in Fort Lauderdale when you and I initially connected, and then last week I was in Vegas. Dude, I went to Chris Angel's show by myself in Vegas. I literally walked a strip by myself, like in Vegas. Like, it was one of the best nights of the entire week while I was out there. But I was just alone by myself, enjoying doing the things that I want to do. I went and had dinner. I went to the show. I walked down the strip, and then I stopped and had a cigar at a cigar bar all by myself. Now, I had conversations with people all over the place, but at the end of at the end of it, I was back by myself. So stay there a little bit, man. And if you can, talk more about, what you learned about yourself, what you leaned into, how you grew in your faith and relationship with God over those, 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, well, this is a crazy story, and I would love to say that if you're out there struggling, guys or girls, if you're out there struggling and you hear a story where God speaks to somebody, they always think, okay, it's the next day or it's immediately. Remember, there was 10 years from the time that I left Miami and had that original prompting from God to get out of that lifestyle, and I fell into other traps. So, and I wasn't even saved yet as a Christian. I was Catholic, but I wasn't saved yet. I really didn't have the power of the Holy Spirit with me. But I was living kind of a rock star lifestyle. And why I say that is because I was covering the NFL, and a lot of my friends were football players. They had like this rock star lifestyle. In Tampa, we didn't wait to get into any clubs. Everything was on the house, and that gets, it's hard to say no at a young age, even though I wasn't really young. But still a young man. Here's the thing. And I wanted to find a wife, but I had all the wrong intentions or reasons. I wasn't thinking clearly. So my sister-in-law calls me up one day and she says, "Hey, they're casting for the show Big Brother." And I said, "Well, I've never seen that show. Literally, I've never watched an episode." And she goes, "Well, just go down. It's at this local bar, and I think you'd be good for it." So I go down. I do this little interview. They call me back a couple days later. I go on a second one. They call me back a couple days later. I go on a third and a fourth. And after the fourth interview, now it's like an hour and a half. And I'm starting to think I'm going to be on Big Brother. And so they say, "We're sending you out to California to film the Big Brother. You're going to be on this show." And I had to sign all this paperwork. I can't tell my family. I can't tell anybody. It's amazing to be on a TV show, how much secrecy there was. So I fly out to California. I'm sequestered in a hotel room for 2 days. I have an hour to work out and an hour for a meal. Everything else is in my room. I can't talk to anybody. So for 2 days, I'm anticipating I'm going to be the next big reality TV star. And what's that going to bring, Frank? It's going to bring a ton of money. It's going to bring a ton of fame and recognition. And guess what? I'm going to meet a lot of chicks. And that's where I'm going to find happiness. Some girl's going to see me on the show and she's going to want to, I'm going to have my pick of all these women. So the third day, I'm going crazy in this hotel room, and the production assistant knocks on the door, and I'm like, "Okay, is this it? Like, are we ready to start filming? Because I'm ready to go." She's like, "Well, the producers just had a talk, and they're going to send everybody home. They're recasting the entire show." I tell you this now, friends, because I feel so stupid and silly. I was so depressed. She said, "We'll send you home tomorrow." And I said, "No, I'm going home tonight on a red eye." Remember, this is LA. You know how long that takes to get from LA to Tampa. I said, "I'm going home on a red eye." I went to the LA International Airport at 10 o'clock that night, and I went to the bar and I ordered 3 glasses of wine. The bartender looks at me and he's like, "Where's your friends?" I'm like, "Nope." I said, it was like tequila, but full glasses of wine, 1, 2, 3, because I wanted to numb out this pain. And I remember being on the plane as it was taking off with a good buzz, trying to numb all these negative feelings that I was a fool for ever thinking that I was going to be on a reality show and that was going to save me and give me happiness. And I took a vomit bag, a barf bag, and I borrowed a pen from the stewardess and I wrote notes on this bag saying, "You're an idiot. You're a fool. Your life right now is 36. You got no great job opportunities. You got no woman in your life. And this is the lowest you've ever been in your entire life." And then I passed out on that plane. I called my dad when I got in at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he says, "I thought you were on a business trip." I said, "No, it's a long story. Just come pick me up at the airport." That was on a Sunday. Now, I was working for a magazine, and the publisher, I was the editor, and the publisher calls me on Monday and says, "I got a story for you." And I'm like, "Okay, what's the story?" He's like, "It's this girl, and she just won a fitness competition, and you got to do the story on her." I hand on my heart, and this is the God's honest truth. I said, "No." I go, "I've seen this girl. I know what it's about. I've dated this girl 100 times, and that's what's wrong with my life. I've looked for a woman with all the wrong intentions." I said, "Send somebody else." And he says, "I can't. You're the guy that's got to do the story." Long story short, this is my wife. I assume that since she won a fitness competition, she worked at a tanning salon, that she was dating a guy 20 years older than her. She wanted to be on TV someday as as an anchor, a weather girl, and I just had all these assumptions because of the way she looked and because of that she was a fitness person. So I sit down to interview her, and I'm a jerk. I'm just not looking at her, and she starts talking about she loves her mom and dad. Okay, well, that's a good thing. I write that down. She starts, well, she's got a normal job. She's actually a sales professional for a medical device company. Hey, I didn't expect that. And then she goes, "I love Jesus." And I was like, wow. And after the thing, and here's the crazy part, Frank. I had written in my journal a couple of weeks earlier. I said, I came home one night drinking, and I said, "God, I'm frustrated. I'm going nowhere," much like I did on that airplane. I said, "You got to send me an angel." I said, because I'm broken. I need an angel. And I signed that journal entry. I said, "David," and I almost like an angry signature, like, "God, there's my petition. I need an angel because right now I'm a broken man." And at the end of that interview, Frank, I said, "Okay, I've gotten names spelled wrong in the newspaper all the time. And it's not a good thing when someone opens the paper, their name's spelled wrong. So just to make sure, let me get the spelling of your name correct. It's Angelique, yes?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I said, "So that's Angelique." And she's like, "No, I'm Greek, and there's no Q in the Greek alphabet. So my name is spelled Angelike." And to this day, last week, 12 years later, people call our house and they're like, "Is Angel like there?" And so People will say, God talks to you. If I say God send me an angel, and there's people calling our house 12 years later that says angel like there, I mean, that was God shaking my head saying, you've done some of the hard work, David. You've eliminated some of these things from your life. You've tried to surrender to me and my will. But you still need someone to take you to that next level. And I believe that she was the one that was the catalyst, that God said, we're going to do big things with you, not just for you, David, but for the kingdom of heaven, and for the world. And so, you know, I'm on that journey right now. I'm an author. We have a podcast. I'm not saying I'm worldwide, but I know that our message is to infiltrate the minds and hearts of people, and to let them know that if you surrender to God, good things are going to come.
Yeah, brother. What a beautiful story. I mean, I was getting goosebumps as you're sharing it, and I know that story. So that's how powerful that is. Like, I knew that about you because I know I made a comment to you the other day when you were on the phone. Like, hey, tell Angel like that Frank says hi. There's going to be thousands of young men that are going to hear this conversation, and they're probably out there. They're looking for the one, but many of them probably have some of those wrong intentions. What are some of the things that men are looking for that are wrong, and what are the right intentions that they should be going out there in the world looking for when trying to attract and find the one?
Well, this is easy, Frank. What's one of the most popular poses that we see on Instagram with girls? What's one of the most popular things? It's the over the shoulder, right? They're doing the selfie over the shoulder, and what's really front and center is their rear end, and they're looking over their shoulder. Yeah. Um, I dated girls who I was physically attracted to, and there was not much else there. And even my best friend at the time, he was married with 3 kids, and I started dating this girl because I was a personal trainer, and this young girl came in 12 years younger than me, and I started dating her. My friend calls me up. He goes, "Let's have some lunch." And I go over his house, and he's making a barbecue, and he goes, "Look," he goes, "you know me." He goes, "I don't try and tell you much." He goes, "But this one's not for you." He's like, "Come on, bro. Like, it's not going to be good." And I said, "You know what? You're right. I see the writing on the wall." I go, "I'll do something about it." And 2 years later, I was still with that girl. So what happens is we don't take the advice. If you're a young guy, look, we're driven by hormones. We see beauty all over the place. The Kardashians are there, and they're famous for a reason. You have to ask yourself, do you want a wife and a life, or are you looking for something that is superficial? There's a lot of good girls out there, and there's a lot of girls out there who are just superficial, without casting judgment on people, because at one time I was superficial. And to many degrees, we never lose that. You just have to constantly course correct. You have to ask yourself, is this the person? I have 3 girls. And my wife says, there's a reason God gave you 3 girls, because you got to learn your lesson the hard way. And so you have to ask yourself, how do you want to raise your family? What do you want your legacy to be? And at some point, it gets old. I have friends now that, are dating girls 20 years younger than them. And it looks fun, but at some point, you're going to turn around in life like King Solomon did. He had more wealth than Bezos and Gates and the Tesla guy put together. King
Musk.
Solomon in the
Yeah.
Bible, yeah, more wealth put together. He had all these concubines and women, and at the end of the day, he was like, "There's not enough here. It's not satisfying." Like you talk about pornography, it satisfies that initial dopamine in you, but it's for a second and it's fleeting. It's not internal, it's not lasting, it's superficial things that give us that little dopamine effect. And one of the things I got to give you credit for is when you were on my podcast and I said, "Frank, this is a hard subject to talk about," you said, "No, it's not." You go, "I don't take that route. It's actually, I'm going to face it head on. I'm not going to skirt around the issues. We're going to make this a topic that is on everybody's minds, but we're not going to be fearful of it." And I was like, "Bro, that's what I'm talking about." I love the fact that you said that.
And I love that you called out, the IG models, the girls that are objectifying themselves. It's like we don't even need men any longer to objectify women. It's like the women are doing it to themselves. But one thing I've realized in my life with the work that we're doing with the men is when you stop treating women as objects, the women that present themselves as objects to the world are no longer attractive to you. You begin to see beauty from the inside out. Now, there's still beautiful women. Like I believe man should have a beautiful woman in his life. So, I think a lot of guys struggle with that though. They're like, okay, you're telling me not to place beauty at the top of it, but it's important part for men. Like we're attracted to that. So how do you kind of advise men there as far as wrestling and struggling with that piece?
Look, I mean, I almost can't. It's kind of hypocritical. It's easy for me to say, guys, looks don't matter. I mean, but here's what I will say. 12 years into a marriage, when I first met Angela, I still think she's the most beautiful woman on the planet. But 12 years into a marriage, there's so many other things that take precedent. It's not how beautiful your wife is. It's how you get along. It's how you form a family together. It's how you parent together. It's when you're sick, how does she take care of you? When you're down, how does she lift you up? And vice versa. And she taught me a lot of powerful lessons. The one lesson I would tell young men out there is, you think as soon as you get married that sex is on demand. You and I now, we're married, and there's no more working for it. When you're single, you court the girl, you try and do all these nice things, you're on your best behavior, and you think when you get married, well, it's just, I'm the king of the castle. When I want sex, it's there. And it's not. And my wife's reminded me several times, she's like, you have to court me. You have to seduce me. I don't, whether it's 5 years into our marriage, 12 years into our marriage, or 25 years into our marriage, I'm a woman and we don't change. You have to court us and seduce us. It's different. And you hear comedians talk about it and we all laugh. Comedians like, when I got married, but we laugh because the married men in the audience know it's true. It's that women are from Mars, men are from Venus. Women do need romance. That doesn't change. That's not just something in movies. That's a reality. And for men, we have to realize that. But she changed me a lot. And then you just get older. And I think, again, I can't emphasize this. If you're not walking with Jesus and that's not a part of your life, then it's very easy to stay seduced in pornography. It's very easy to stay seduced in a life where your main goal is to go out and hook up. Once you start having that walk, like Paul says in the Bible, it's not that the feelings will leave you. You'll just have the Spirit there to combat those thoughts. We started this off talking about touch, and you asked me about how that was important because it was in the book. And we look at all the things that have happened in the church with pastors and Catholic priests and just people that we look up to. And what happens is, one of the biggest sin natures is what? Lust. That's where they fall most often. A pastor showed, a picture, or he hit on some girl, or he had an affair, or a priest. And what happens is, we don't do the things that you're doing enough, Frank. We're not talking about the taboo subjects. And therefore, what happens is they get hidden away and people don't know how to express themselves. And it becomes even darker and darker and darker. And what Paul said in the Bible is, it's good for you if you can devote yourself to the faith and devote yourself to Jesus like me, then it's good. But if you can't, and this is the main point, he says it's better to get married, because you will not know what to do with all of those lustful feelings. And what happens is, when you see that's the phrase that Catholics have told their people and the priests is, I think it's not the whole truth. Because let's take sex out of the equation. I have an aunt who's a Catholic nun. She's been a Catholic nun for over, I think, 55 or 60 years. And let's take the physical act of sex out of the equation. Let's go back to touch. And let's go back to marriage. And what I just said, when you're 12 years in and you take a sex part out of it. Touch for a man or a woman is a caress. It's knowing that, hey, if you've had a hard day at work, come here. The physical touch of even your arm against their arm. I remember on our first date, Angelique took my hand and just rubbed my hand like that, right? When we were watching the movie. Touch is so important. We see it in the animal kingdom, right? When you see primates, or you see even little baby lions and they're touched and licked. When you see kids who are abused or neglected when they're young, they have problems later on because they weren't given that affection. It has nothing to do with sex. It's physical touch, and we need physical touch. And I think it's almost absurd for a priest or a nun to say, hey, it's enough to get a hug after church from a parishioner. What happens when they're sick and they want someone to cater them and take care of them, or rub their back or their shoulders? When we devoid human beings of good, honest physical touch, outside of sex, it does even more damage. And then it creates this kind of, I would call like this monster inside where they don't know how to deal with physicality and expressing their emotions in a physical way. And it's something nobody really talks about. And again, I got to give you credit for doing that.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And everything I bring, to these conversations, to the podcast, to the work, to the coaching is through my own experiences. So for me, it's been, I made a very big decision in my life when I gave my life to Christ back in 2018. And then when I, decided to quit porn, 4 months later, that was a choice and decision that I made to remove that. But I also began to walk a life of purity. Now I'd been in a relationship at that point for almost 3.5, 4 years that we had been sexually active. I probably made some mistakes in how we handled that, but it's been 3.5 years now since I've laid with a woman or had sex, and for me, the physical touch with the friends, the relationships, like every man that is in my life, like when he sees me, he's getting a big giant hug. I'm looking forward to the day that I get to meet you in person because that's how I'm going to greet you as well. But it's what I get out of those little physical expressions that has brought in so much more joy and happiness than sex would have ever given me because I was always having sex not in the proper way, not in God's design for it. So I love that we're having this conversation around the importance of touch. And I also love what you shared there as far as like needing to continually like show up and court your wife. We had a relationship expert or intimacy expert on the show recently. And he talked about a lot of men think that like the I do is like the end point where you have to stop courting and dating your wife. In reality, that's like the starting line. Like the day that you say I do, it's like you now have to start showing up in a different way as a man. So I love that you shared that
Well,
there.
check this out. It's funny you mentioned that. So when we were living in Tennessee and we were getting ready to move, we put a lot of our stuff up on Facebook Marketplace. And so this guy calls us up one day and he says, "I'm going to buy your couch." I'm like, "Okay." So Angelique tells me, she goes, "Hey, this guy's coming over and he's a Tennessee Titans wide receiver." And I was like, "Okay, this will be interesting." And he comes over, and his name is Cody Hollister. And if you're listening to this, look him up. This dude is a stud. He's like, he's just jacked. He's got this long hair. He kind of almost looks like Jesus in some of his pictures. And he comes over, he comes into our house, and we start talking about the book and we start talking about God. He's a believer. And he's like, "Yeah," he's like, I'm saving myself." And I was like, wow. Like it's hard for the regular guy. But I said, "Cody, if there's anybody who knows what it would be like to save yourself and to abstain, I can't imagine what it would be like to be a young, jacked, 6 foot 2 or 3 NFL wide receiver traveling the country." And I said, "But you have a great platform." I'm like, "I can imagine you in a locker room being able to evangelize to some of the other players and talk about this." And he was just, I mean, this dude was the real deal. And I still, when I see updates on his picture, I'm looking at him right now, and I'm like, I mean, this guy must have chicks just beating down his door, And but he's devoted his life to Jesus, and it's just once the Holy Spirit gets inside of you, that is the power, that is your armor. And Frank, I would love to say, even when I met my wife, that you know, we had a whirlwind romance. I remember at the end of our first date, so we courted for 2 months without even knowing that we liked each other. It almost got to the point where we were having coffee. We were never flirting, but for a whole summer we had these coffee dates. And I said to myself, "Oh my God, David, like you're the friend, like." Talk about, you went from being a really fast mover to being a turtle, and you just ruined it because she's going to come to you one day and say, "I need advice on this guy because you played that friend card too long." So I said, let's go out for a real date. We went out to watch a movie and dinner. And when we came home and I dropped her off at the door, she's like, "I want you to come inside." And I knew, I swear to you, I knew and she knew that it didn't mean come inside to have sex. It meant that we had connected on such a level that we didn't want the date to end. And we abstained in our relationship for a long time. And here's a point of honesty and a point of real growth that I think. We didn't abstain. We abstained a long time, but we didn't wait till we got married. Now, we got married in a Greek church and we went through counseling with a Greek priest. Now, Greek priests are different than Catholic priests because Greek priests can marry. And this priest was married and he had children right there in Tampa. Great guy, Father Stavros. And he did
I
this.
got another buddy that got married by Father Stavros,
He's a
Dan
great
Long.
guy. Oh yeah,
Dan
Dan
Long.
Long, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Father Stavros took us through this counseling, and he said, "Are you guys sexually active?" And we said, reluctantly, "Yeah, we are." He goes, "I want you to abstain." He goes, "Even though you can't go backwards," he goes, "Listen to me. I want you to abstain." He goes, "And this is why." He goes, "Because in your marriage there will be several times, a lot of times, where sex will not be the band-aid, where you won't be able to rely on sex and physical intimacy to cure all." And he goes, "You need to be able to know what that feels like to work through these things." And I'll be darned, man, if that wasn't some of the best advice we ever got. Now, it was hard. It was really tough. I mean, there was times where we were like, "Just go home, get away from me, like don't sit on the couch next to me." But there was a purpose there. Sex isn't the cure all for everything. It is an adjunct to marriage. It's a super important part of marriage, but it is not the basis of a marriage. And it goes back to our original conversation. If you are looking for a woman who is simply hot that gives you great sex, and on the physical side, your marriage is getting a start. Its foundation is cracked from the beginning, because that is not the foundation of a solid marriage. And it took me a long time to realize that. I wish I would have known it in my 20s or even my early 30s, but I had to be broken down by God on that plane on the way back and said, "You thought, David?" He was like saying, "You thought this? You thought a reality show was going to bring you happiness and peace in your life? And you thought fame and hot chicks were going to bring you this? No. I'm going to break you down to the point where you're begging me to help you, and you're going to beg me for an angel, and I'm going to deliver it to you in such a way that it's going to hit you on the side of the head and you can't deny it. And once you learn that lesson, you're going to be my tool for the rest of your time. Once I deliver this lesson to you and you know that it was me that delivered you this woman and this lifestyle and these beautiful children, then you're going to be my tool. You're going to be my guy for the rest of your life." And that's why I devote my life to Jesus, is because people told me even a couple of years ago to quiet down the Jesus part if you want to be successful. And I said, "Well, Jesus has given me this wife, these children, this house, this all these beautiful things. Why would I ignore him? I'm going to do the opposite." And as a writer, I made a post and I said, "I've made Jesus a footnote in my life, and I'm going to make him the headline from here on out." And I'll tell you what, I've done that ever since that day.
Powerful, man. And I love the paradigm shift in the perspective there. It's like the sex is not the band-aid. I mean, how many people like brag about or look forward to makeup sex, right? It's almost like we want to argue, like we haven't had sex for a really long time. Let me go start an argument with my wife so we can have makeup sex. It's like such a broken approach, such a broken way of looking at what is the one of the most intimate acts that you can be doing with another human being. Just absolutely love that. Can you talk about the moment when, I don't know if there was a single defining moment in your life, but when Jesus really did become at the forefront? You talked about you were raised Catholic, you weren't saved yet, and now entrepreneur believer hat, it's at the forefront of everything you're doing. He's the co-pilot in your life, he's in your business, he's in your relationship. What did that kind of shift look like for David in his life?
Oh, this is good because South Tampa Fellowship is a church there, right where you are. And my whole life, I'd gone to church where I stood and I sat down and I went out of obligation. I'm kind of an open book about this. There was plenty of times when I woke up on a Sunday morning and I looked at the girl next to me and I said, "Hey, I got to go to church. You got to go home." And think about that. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And so I had religion, but I didn't have faith. I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. That's one of the basis of the pursuit is you can have religion. Don't mistake that for a relationship with Jesus. And so Angelique takes me to South Tampa Fellowship. They're actually giving me stuff. What do you call it? They're feeding me the Word of God, and that was the beginning of something. So in 2016, I'm out at a rewards trip in Maui, and there was some girl from Australia there, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm going to give my life to Christ this morning." And I was like, "You know what? I need to get baptized again too." And so there was a pastor there on our team, and we got we got baptized in the waters of right off of Maui. But then Angelique, again, I can't tell you what it means to have a spirit-filled woman in your life. If I could give you one piece of advice right now, it's to look past the physical. Find a spirit-filled, strong woman, because that'll change everything more than anything in your life. We need a spirit-filled, strong woman. And she was enough to know that I brought you this far, David. I've introduced you to what it means to have a relationship with Christ. And what happened was I almost gave that up. I've told this story 1,000 times, but I'm going to tell it for your audience, and I'm going to tell it to you exactly like it happened without any embellishment. Is I found this beautiful woman who was great job, loved her family, loved Jesus. She was gorgeous. She wanted to have kids like I wanted to have. And at the very last moment, right before we got married, after there's a ring on her finger and the invitations were sent out, I got this kind of audacity to me. And I remember going into her house one night and I said, "Hey, I'm just going to lay down the law. Here I am. Like, I have no business being with a woman that looks like you, but I'm going to lay down the law because I had a crazy thought." And I said, "Hey, I'm still going to party." Like, I literally said this to her. I go, "If I come home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and I take a cab home, I go, I don't want you giving me any shit when I walk in the door. Just, are we clear with that? Like, and 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 she says, no. She's like, "I'm not clear with that." She's like, "Where is this guy I dated?" And here's where, if you're a lady listening to this podcast, you have to have the strength at a point like this, like she did. She said, "Here's the thing." And as she took off her ring, her wedding ring, and she put it right there on the table, she goes, "There's the ring." She goes, "If you want to throw this all away, throw it all away. But before you go and walk out that door for the last time, and we never see each other again, and we cancel this wedding, would you do me a favor? Would you read the Bible with me?" It's exactly how it happened. And I was kind of like this proud Catholic at the time still. And I said, "I've read the Bible. What are you going to teach me?" I was arrogant. I was prideful. But reluctantly, I said, "Yeah." And we went upstairs and we read the verse from First Corinthians where, again, the Apostle Paul says, "When I was a boy, I thought like a boy. And when I became a man, it came time to put the childish things behind me." And Frank, it was literally like a movie epiphany moment. It changed everything. The scales fell off my eyes. And I said, "Yeah, that's me. I was a boy." And we've never, I mean, we've had arguments since then, but that was the last major thing in our that almost ruined our relationship and didn't make it happen. And she was smart enough then, or spirit filled enough then, to say, now, years into the marriage, 5 years into the marriage, that you need a man now to guide you. Like, I can only take you so far in your spiritual journey as a woman. You need a strong spiritual father to take you to the next level. And I'll tell you exactly who that was. And when you talk about a pivotal point in my life, someone said, "There's a guy named Pastor Mark Driscoll that is here in Arizona. We were living right down the street, and he's got a church, and you need to go to that church." And I went there and I listened to this Pastor Mark Driscoll talk like a man, look like a man, preach like a man, and correct people like you do, Frank, like a man. Like, sit there and look at the guys. "Hey, guys, I see you in my church and you're showing up with your girlfriend. I know you're living together and you're coming to my church. You're living in sin. That's not what you do. You're not going to come here and pretend like you're not." And so he took me to the next level.
Yeah, man, that led us right to, the next point I wanted to kind of discuss with you here a bit, because we've been talking about, the need for touch, relationships, but really the female male relationship, finding the right one. But I wanted to get, your perspective on male to male relationships, because I think they're more important for a younger man as he's growing, in himself, as he's growing in his relationship with God and his relationship with Christ. He needs those men. So speak to, that here a little bit more, because there's a lot of, and number one, how old were you when that happened?
When I saw Mark,
When you had that clarity moment of like, I've been living as a boy and now I'm ready to become a man. Because we got a lot of guys that are in their 20s, mid to
yeah,
late 20s.
yeah,
They're like,
and
"Oh,
guess
I'm
what?
so far behind things." For me, I was 36 years old until I woke up and said, "You've been living like a boy this entire life." So I'm curious with you, and then
I'll beat
what
you.
advice to the young guys
I
out
beat
there?
you by 2 years. I was 38.
Okay.
So you talk about there's always time. I was
Yeah.
38 and still living my life like a boy, devoid of the real responsibility in coming to it. Look, I think the best thing that you and I can do, Frank, is talk to these men and not be hypocritical, and not say your life's going to change on a dime, and not say, "Hey, you still won't have feelings, you won't have promptings to go to these physical things in your life." But there becomes a time when you have to say to yourself, what does the future look like? One of the downfalls of young men is we think we're indestructible. We think we're going to live forever, and we think we're always going to be young. And we tend to think in the moment. And so if you're a young guy right now, my biggest piece of advice to you is, like, look 20, 30, 40 years down the road, because life goes by quick, and it's not worth it just to live for your 20s. How much stuff do we put in our bodies in our 20s, right? And you look back and say, hey, you know what? That's not good. I mean, how many times have people done stuff and you look back and, well, you have physical ailments now? Well, yeah, because you put all this crap in your body when you were in your 20s. Um, Life is long, and there's something. I always wanted a family. I came from a pretty large family, and so I had that ability to see down the road and say, if can I bear children with this woman? Will she be a good wife for me? Will she love me? Because trust. Oh gosh, this is such a good story. I'm glad I thought of this. I'm so glad I thought of this. Okay, Frank, this is great for you. Think about this again. I mean, as real as it can be, the truth right here. I love to party and dance always. My nickname was Hip Hop Dave because I would go to clubs and just dance. Okay, and so when I met Angelique, and I love salsa dancing, and I love all kinds of dancing, and I love music. Like, I'm excited about it. So when her and I were dating, we got in an argument one time because I'm like, you don't want to go out to clubs. Like, you don't want to dance. I'm like, you don't love music. I can't play loud music or party and stuff. And she looked at me because she's more mature than me, even though she's younger than me. She goes, really? She's like, so that's kind of like a deal breaker for you. That's going to be a problem in our relationship, that I don't like hip hop music, that I'm not a fanatic when it comes to salsa dancing. And I was like, yeah, I guess you got a point. She's like, there's other things. It's just a small part of our relationship. And here's what I realized years later once I was in it. Guys, I'm going to ask you this question to your audience. You meet a girl now. You have, whether it's football, she doesn't like football, or she doesn't like dancing or hip hop music. 10 years into your relationship, your marriage, when you have kids and you have a life and a house together, is it going to be more important to you that your wife liked football, that she liked hip hop, or is it going to be more important to you that your wife can go out of that house, maybe on even a trip, and you can trust her, right? Like, right now, I don't care if she can dance. I don't care if she likes hip hop music. What I care about is my wife could go anywhere in the country, be around anybody. She can go on a girls' weekend if she wanted to, even though she really doesn't like that thing. But I would trust her, like the ultimate trust. If you don't have trust in a marriage and you can't trust your spouse, none of that other stuff is so superficial. And so sometimes we think so myopically in our young man mind. We think that all these things are so important. When you get older, you're going to want a wife that loves you, for better or worse, for richer or poor, for sickness and health. I know a wife right now out in Arizona that's taking care of her husband who's got cancer. They've got 2 kids. And I'm like, that woman's a rock. That guy could have married someone who could have bolted on him, and left him there sick. There's so much more to a woman than what you see on the outside.
Love that so much, man. Last bit I wanted to kind of get your take on here. You talked about getting your house in order before trying to go out there and kind of find the one or find a potential mate. I think a part of that is getting your financial house in order. When I look back at your career, I mean, you've been successful in multiple industries, right? From writing to speaking to network marketing to podcasting, and now what you and Angelique are building with the Turned On movement there. To the young guys out there that are watching or hearing this, and maybe they haven't really found their calling, they're not really getting their financial house in order. What should these young men really be looking for in building up in themselves to get their house in order so they can then go out there and attract that incredible mate?
Yeah, I mean, the good ones out there, and the big thing is, guys, when we started this conversation talking about Instagram, and we talked about what's going on with technology. Look, the good ones out there, if you fall in love, picture this, gentlemen, you fall in love with a girl, you go head over heels for her, right? And you're like, this is the one. She's a good girl. She's gonna be a good mother. She's smart, and she's gonna look at your Instagram. She's gonna look at your Facebook. Trust me. She's gonna go back. Things are gonna pop up. I mean, we're kind of we've kind of missed that part because, thank God, Instagram and Facebook wasn't around in my 20s. Thank God. I'll just say that. I don't want to be naive to that. But they're gonna go back and look and like, look at you, like we're gonna show our kids this someday. I mean, yeah, I mean, Angelique ignored a lot of things, and she took me for who I was, and there's a lot of faults in me. But I would say that sometimes you got to go through things, and I would be hypocritical to tell guys, hey, you know, you're not going to have to go through some struggles. Sometimes the best way we learn is by failure. I had I had an Escalade on, I think it was on 26s. I don't even know. With 24-inch tires. I went to go get one replaced. The guy goes, these aren't 24s. These are like 20. It was just gigantic, ridiculous tires. I had the convertible, at one time, my main goal in life was to have 20-inch biceps. And I was like at 18 and a half. My friends used to call me sleeveless in Seattle because I cut the sleeves off of all of my shirts. There wasn't a mirror. I was probably one of the most vain people you've ever come across. There wasn't a mirror that I didn't stop and pose by, you know? And I'm be honest with you. And guess what? Your body is going to fail you. Yeah, you want to stay in shape. You don't want to turn into a slob, but your body's not always going to be there. It's you aged. You're going to go gray. You're going to go bald. Your biceps aren't going to be 19 inches, and you want to say, hey, but I benched 500 pounds in high school. We look at Al Bundy, right, from Married with Children. His whole thing was, look at my football card. I scored 4 touchdowns in my high school year. You don't want that, guys. Like, don't live just for your 20s or 30s. Live for the long game. You want to be there. I don't think there's anything that you should look forward to more in life than looking back, and Pastor Mark Driscoll would say this, than looking back one day when you're older and having your children and your grandchildren around going, I've left a legacy. And this is what Pastor Mark Driscoll said to me. He goes, many men just think of leaving a financial legacy. He goes, and that's something we got from our fathers. We were raised in a generation where the dads were the disciplinarians and they were the ones who were supposed to provide. So when we talked about a legacy, he said, most of you think of, what am I going to leave to my children in terms of money? He said, but how many of you guys are worried about leaving a spiritual legacy to your sons and daughters? Like, I want my daughters to carry on a spiritual legacy. So their children and grandchildren, years from now, after I'm gone, will have the Holy Spirit because of the spiritual foundation that I'm laying in them now. So you definitely want to have a financial well-being, but you got to have that spiritual legacy too. And we don't talk about that often enough.
No, love that so much, man. Thank you for taking that question there. It wasn't what I was expecting, but I think it's exactly what I and the listeners needed to hear. And I can tell you from somebody that had the 20-inch biceps, the only thing that comes with that is the inability to find shirts that fit. So you probably saved yourself a lot of money from having to get custom clothes made.
Yeah,
So
we used to wear like a tuxedo or something, and the neck would be tight and the arms would be tight, and then this big bunchy thing in the bottom, like it would never fit right. Yeah.
Dude, I had 3 different seasons of clothes for almost 10 years. There would be the extreme off season, like bulking clothes. There'd be the super lean clothes when I was like 8-10 weeks out from a show. And then there'd be just kind of the normal everyday clothes. But it was just something, it was like, the inability to find things that wear. Like, now I know they have a lot of companies that actually make clothes for fit people. David, brother, I feel like I'm literally talking to myself, man. Our stories are so similar, and just our journeys are parallel, man. This has been an amazing conversation. We could go for hours, but I want to be respectful for your time in the audience as well. So as we're going home, one last question we'll end the episode here today with. But before we do that, guys, or just plug it, where can people connect with you? Tell them about the book, the podcast, where you guys are hanging out online, and just if people want to learn more about you.
So here's the irony of it all. You can find us the easiest on turnedon.com. And turned on is a metaphor for Matthew 5:14, which is you are the light of the world. And so when Angelique and I said we're going to have a website, I said, let's call it Turned On. And that was available. And you would think that if you went to turnedon.com, what would you see? Some bad stuff. And I said, she goes, well, is this appropriate? I said, yes, because just like you, Frank, I said, we're going to take people, we're going to meet them where they're at. If somebody comes to turnedon.com thinking they're going to get one thing, we're going to give them Jesus. So we want it to be a catalyst. And I'll tell you what, I'll show you if you guys are watching. So here's the book is called The Pursuit. And I wanted to leave you the best quote in this book is not from me, the author. The best quote in this book is not from a celebrity. It's not from somebody who you've heard of before. The best quote in this book is from my wife. And I would be remiss because I was looking for it and I want to make sure I get it perfectly. The best quote in my entire book is from my wife, who said this. Remember, Frank, when I was talking about that time where I was about to put it all on the table and because I wanted to party. And she was like, no, are you going to be a man of God? And she challenged me to read the Bible. Think about this, men and women out there. And I put this in my book. She goes, in discussing this part, my wife shared this thought that she had at that exact time. And it's important to you now. She says, David, you were stubborn. I mean, stubborn and prideful to the T, right? You were stubborn. And she goes, if I thought I could win you back or transform you or transform your attitude on my own, then I could have done it with sex. I could have done it by manipulation. I could have allowed you to walk all over me as a woman. But thankfully, she says, I was mature enough and spiritually mature enough to know that the only way I could convict you with the flesh was for you to be convicted by Jesus Christ. And the only way I was going to reach you with his word. So let's break that down. We're at this pivotal moment where she's like, you're going to walk out that door forever because you are a boy and you want to party. I could say, let's just have sex and get past it, right? And most guys would be like, yep, let's get over it. She's like, I could have manipulated you. How many women out there would manipulate a man, right? Through jealousy or whatever. Oh, but she goes, or I could have let you just walk all over me and said, yeah, whatever you want to do, I'll be that girl that doesn't say anything. She goes, but the only way I knew that I could convict you, not from my words, but from the word of Jesus Christ and through his word. So I took you upstairs and I had you open the Bible, David. I had you read that passage. And I'll be darned if that passage, like I said, didn't have the scales fall off my eyes immediately. And within that was one of those times where immediately I went from saying, yeah, Jesus, you're right. I mean, it says right there in the word, I was a boy and now I became a man. So I think that's very important for both men and women, especially women that listen to your podcast. It's not sex, it's not manipulation, and it's not to let them walk all over you. You turn your man onto the word. You read the Bible together. And that's why I tell people, couples, if you pray out loud together over one another, your marriage will last. They said there was a study that said couples who claim to be religious, right? Couples who claim to be religious, men and women who are married who claim to be religious, only have a slightly better 1% chance better rate of not getting divorced. So all marriages, like 52% of marriages end in divorce. Well, that number for couples who say they're religious is only like 51%. And so other people are like, well, big deal. It doesn't make a difference. But this is a difference. They found out that couples who pray together out loud, that number drops down below 5%. Look at the difference in claiming to be religious rather than having a relationship with Jesus and inviting him into that relationship. That's why when you take a vow in a church to marry somebody, you're doing it in front of God and you invite Jesus to be the third person. And that's where you're going to save your marriage. That's where you're going to have a long-term relationship.
Powerful. And yeah, for the small audience of females that we have out there, like you don't need a name like Angel Like to be an angel in your man's life. Like you can lead him to the word. And for men, you don't need to go find an angel like. You can find an angel in any woman if she's spirit filled, if she's spirit led, and she's got that relationship with.
Yeah, Frank, if a woman challenged you like that, right? You're looking for that. Men might be afraid, and women, you might be afraid to challenge. But if you challenge from the heart, you're going to be attracted to that woman more that stands up for herself and speaks up for God. You're going to be like, wow, that's the woman I want in my life. You know?
Yeah, I was recently challenged by a woman, and it's caused me to look and evaluate some of the things that were still showing up in my life, and yeah, a little bit different of a story there, and it's one hopefully one day I'll be able to share here. But powerful stuff, David. I've loved
Well,
loved
thank you,
this today,
brother.
man.
Yeah.
No, thank you, man. We'd like to end every single episode with the same question, though. So obviously, the title of our podcast is The Superhuman Life. I have my kind of philosophy on what I think living a superhuman life is, but we'd like to get the guest take. So, David, as we bring today's conversation to a close, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Oh gosh, it's a great question. And if I go back and I just close my eyes for a second, I would say it is a surrender. I've only been able to go back to that word because I chased everything under the sun. I relate to that King Solomon story so well because we look for, whether it's chocolate to give you that, that little dopamine effect, whether it's an IG, whether it's video games, whether it's sex, whether it's music. We're always looking for that thing that's going to fill up our soul and fill up our tank. And it's so easy to get the little things, but everything else is fleeting. And when you're chasing several rabbits, you catch none. If you can surrender to God, there's a beautiful thing in that where all of a sudden, all of the things that stress you out, all of the things that the world is presenting on the news and with the future, and you just say, you know what? I mean, there is a life after this life. There is eternity. And here I am living for the moment instead of living for eternity. So even if I'm not a believer, right? For those of you not a believer, if you just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to give this surrendering thing a chance. Like I've tried every other way and every other way hasn't worked. What have I got to lose? Let me surrender to Jesus and see what he does with my life. That's a superhuman life.
Powerful, powerful. Guys, you heard it here. Turnedon.com. Connect with David, connect with Angelique, aka Angel Like. Pick up the book, The Pursuit Pickup Turned On. Check out the podcast. We just recorded an amazing episode there. And David, man, I'm looking forward to the beginning of this new friendship, man. Although we were originally introduced 2 years, it took us a while to make this happen. But oftentimes, like we said, those ones that you have to jump through hoops to make it happen are what what really transforms things. So appreciate your time today, brother. Guys, like I said, go out there and check out David's work and what he's putting out there into the world. And if you're getting value out of these conversations, you can continue to support us by leaving us a 5-star rating and written review. If you're there on YouTube, make sure to subscribe because our episodes do drop every single Monday afternoon. But for Frank Rich, David Norrie, we love you guys. And we'll see you next week.